G'day, it's Jimmy Bartell.
And Bruce Eva. Our podcast, Yesterday's Heroes, covers all sports.
Honestly, what are you bringing to the table, Beaver?
The knowledge.
Let's test it. How many test wickets did Uak McGrath take?
563.
How many laps around Mount Panorama?
I told you this the other week, 161.
As usual, I wasn't listening to you. Who's winning the Ashes?
Well, that's up to us to debate.
No debate. We'll absolutely romp it in, so listen to me for your tips.
And to me to sound sports smart.
Well, listen to both of us. Subscribe to Yesterday's Heroes wherever you get your podcast.
New episodes every Thursday, thanks to PointsBet.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Tuesday, May 23rd. Australia will soon embark on a debate about whether the government should step in to restrict children's access to online pornography. For many advocates, it's not a minute too soon.
So he clicks on, yes, I'm over 18.
One click.
One click and voila, straight into hardcore porn.
While the link between young people watching pornography and real-life harm has been disputed for years, numerous experts now say that this long-held truth is starting to come undone.
Very easy to click the fact that you're over 18.
That's right, you can pretend to be whoever you want to be when you surf for porn.
Among them is a president of a children's court here who now sees sexual assault allegations that frequently feature choking. It's just one piece of evidence, she says, that suggests how violent porn is being enacted in the bedrooms of teenagers throughout Australia. Today, Chief Reporter Jordan Baker on what a new report into this issue has found, and the pressure that many teens now feel to steer clear of so-called vanilla sex. So, Jordan, what drove you to look into this topic into the first place? I mean, I know you've got 2 kids yourself. So how much of your interest has been driven by the concern that, maybe they could one day stumble upon porn themselves?
So, like many parents, this was sort of a vague concern in the back of my mind, but a lot of parents really don't like facing this issue head on because it's really icky, right? Like It's difficult to talk to your kids about this sort of stuff. So it's been buzzing around in the back of my mind the same way every kind of possible worry about my children buzzes away in the back of my mind. But the thing that made me start thinking about this a lot more was covering a couple of cases in the children's court last year, sexual assaults of teenagers by other teenagers. Both of them involved choking, and one of them involved quite a lot of violence. So it made me start thinking about it, and I started talking to people about it.
Okay. So can you help us understand just how pervasive pornography is in the lives of teens today and how that compares to the decades before porn was so readily available?
So nearly half of Australian teenage boys have seen porn by 13 and nearly half of teenage girls by 15.
Wow.
I mean, porn has been around for a long time. Kids have been very curious about pornography for a long time. There is nothing new about that. But in the past, magazines would be handed around. I remember in the 90s, the boys that we went to school with were, went to great lengths to bootleg VHS tapes and, catching buses across the city to share them with each other. Like, there's nothing new about this. But the difference in the context is that with the growth of the internet, you now don't need to go any further than your own bedroom, if you've got a laptop or a phone, to find it. And there is an enormous amount. Like, there's statistics that suggest, that there's 100,000 tetrabytes of this stuff online, which contextually I don't really know, but it's like, 3 times Netflix's volume of content.
And I think you've written that the world's top 3 adult sites are visited by an estimated 5.81 billion people per month.
Yeah, they're all the top 3 sites are in the 10 most visited sites in the world generally.
I mean, that's quite an astonishing amount of people.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And just to be really clear, there's nothing wrong with pornography. We're not saying that it is bad in itself, and that people shouldn't use it, and that, consenting adults can't do whatever the hell they want. The question is it good for our kids to be seeing very explicit, very violent content so young?
I mean, this is what I wanted to ask you next, because from reading your stories on the issue, it's clear that the pornography that a lot of not just young people, but that adults and teens alike are consuming is really violent. So can you just take us through that a little bit?
So as part of this story, I felt that I should go and have a look, right? I shouldn't write about something without actually knowing what I'm writing about. So I jumped onto some of the world's most, visited sites and had a look. And there is all sorts of very extreme stuff right when you get onto the homepage. And there are particular categories of rough sex, and this is where a lot of the rape stuff is. It's where a lot of the choking stuff is. It's where in a lot of these videos the context is a man, in quotation marks, punishing a woman with sex.
Right.
There is a popular new subgenre called faux-cest, and this is videos that depict step-siblings having sex with each other, or step-parents and step-teens, like both ways, step-mum and step-dad. And the thing is with the algorithms on these sites, and I even discovered this myself, like if you have a little bit of a look at one category, the next time you go on, the algorithm will say, okay, well, Jordan likes this particular type, so it will serve you up more of that particular type.
Right.
So you can very quickly find yourself in a situation in which you are being served up a particular type of sex every time you go on the website.
So is this leading to any real-world harm? I mean, what are the consequences, if any, of young people having such easy access to pornography?
For this story, I spoke to a lot of people, but the Chief Magistrate or the President of the New South Wales Children's Court was among them, and she said that in her 25-odd years of working in legal aid, in working as a judge, she has really seen a shift in sexual assaults among teens from, digital penile vagina penetration to choking, anal sex, violence-related assaults. The police have said the same thing. The police said that they particularly noticed an uptick of choking in the last 18 months. The big concern for them, apart from the general concern about sexual assault, is the potential risk it involves in terms of actual physical harm. Like when you're not getting airways, if you're getting, usually as adults in the BDSM community, for example, there is a lot of care taken to do this stuff safely.
Yep.
They very much understand what they're doing and how to do it well and how to ensure that everyone's consenting. Whereas if you've got a 15-year-old boy who's only ever seen this stuff on Pornhub, he does not understand any of that context. And so, when they're trying out things like choking and autoerotic asphyxiation, there can be some genuine harm done. And so the police are saying not only are these girls being sexually assaulted, but they're fearing for their life because they can't breathe sometimes. And this is deeply traumatic. And the girls that I spoke to as part of this story are already traumatised by some of the sexual experiences they've had, and they're only 16.
And I think what I've seen from what you've written on this is that teens are now sort of experiencing sex that often has hair pulling and verbal degradation and hands around the neck. Is that what these...
There's a big sort of part of this rough content which is very much degradation of women. And so there's a lot of hair pulling, a lot of choking, calling women degrading names. It's not in every subgenre of porn, but there is a particular subgenre that does a lot of this. And so clearly some of these kids are coming across this sort of stuff and thinking that that's... And it's fascinating to me how in normal real life, real world society, we are going to great lengths to educate people about consent, to educate people that violence is not okay. We've moved a long way in terms of domestic violence and rape. And yet there is this proliferation of content online which reinforces this kind of behaviour.
Okay, and so tell me, because I understand there's a relatively new report that's been looking into this. So what has it found and what is it recommending?
So in 2019, there was a Senate inquiry looking into this issue of, is there content online that minors shouldn't be looking at, and is there anything we can do about it? Now, this was part of a global trend because the internet has proliferated completely unregulated. We've had these conversations in a lot of other industries, even the news industry, looking at, all Facebook's using news content for its own advantage. So in the end, Australian newspapers and producers end up getting some some money from Google and Meta for this reason. The internet has grown pretty much unfettered. So globally, there have begun to be these conversations about, well, you know, if we don't let young kids vote and we don't let people under 18 drink alcohol, then why are we letting them do violent gaming and watching, you know, extremely hardcore pornography? Should we be doing something about this? So the UK started looking at this in 2017. We had the Senate inquiry in 2019. As a result of that inquiry, the government commissioned the E-Safety Commissioner, who deals with this area, to develop a roadmap to age verification. So age verification is essentially stopping people who are too young looking at certain websites. Now, there's all sorts of technology available now that doesn't necessarily involve the production of a driver's license in order to do this. Like there's technology where you can just take a selfie and the computer, and I'm not really very computer literate, but somehow the computer or the site works out just from your face whether you are, you know, a pimply adolescent or a 45-year-old journalist. So the Commission has spent years on this. They've done a lot of consultation. There are reports on the consultation available online. In March, they handed this report to the federal government. Now we're waiting for the federal government to release the report, release its response to the report, and see what plan they intend to go ahead with, if any, on the issue of age verification.
And so ultimately, is this the right solution, do you think, to put an age limit on it? I mean, is banning it right? Some will argue that if kids want to access porn, they will likely find a way, and that perhaps the focus should be on far better, you know, education, telling kids about consent and healthy ways of having sex. You know, people I'm sure will say, well, that's just what we need to do.
So I think there's a couple of issues there. I mean, personally, I will wait to see what comes out of this E-Safety Commissioner pathway. But I think putting the onus on parents is really difficult because, you know, the older your child gets, the less control you have over what they do and what they see. So since I've written this story, I've had lots of feedback. Like someone wrote, for example, that they had spent, you know, an enormous amount of money actually buying a software that can, you know, restrict access to various things. They had gone through their entire household and ensured that this is all active. And then the kids go to Nana's house and see porn on YouTube on her smart TV. Or, you know, they might go to a friend's place and their older brother decides to show them something. So no matter how careful you are as a parent, this sort of stuff is always going to happen. The education piece is, again, important, and I think every parent should do it. The reality is that a lot of parents don't. Education is a very porous solution to something like this, and it tends to be the more informed parents and like highly educated parents who will probably be across this a little bit more because they read the paper and whatnot. But there's a whole cohort of parents who are unaware of this, or who culturally don't like raising it with their children, or might be English second language speakers who don't have the access to the same information. So saying education is the key is not a cure-all. I mean, some people will argue that it should be taught in schools, but again, that's a real hot potato because a lot of parents would staunchly oppose having teachers really talk about the nature of sex in porn and what's okay in sex and what's not. That is a very, very socially fraught question.
Thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on and talking to us about this.
It was a pleasure.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Hannah Mills Turbot, with technical assistance from David McMillan. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Billy Slater, and this year I've got my very own podcast. So join me after every round of the NRL season and we'll unpack all the action. So go on, subscribe to the Billy Slater podcast and never miss an episode.
Ram Trucks eats everything else for breakfast.